Hello friends, I'm Kayla. This is my October wrap up. So naturally, I am assigning every book here a Halloween candy that I think best represents it. Here are my stats if you care to peruse. Some things to note are I bought a lot of things not already on my TBR. I read almost exclusively for content. I had so many 4 stars and literally only one 5-star. So it felt like a bit of a weird month because I usually find some of my favorites around this time of year, but I think because of what I was prioritizing and just because I didn't know how the books were gonna go, I just didn't end up with a whole bunch of favorites, but there were so many 4s, but I feel really let down by my own reading. So I have already filmed something for all of these. If you want to just go back and watch my vlogs, this is just basically a recap. I don't think I give any new information, which is why I like to do fun, stupid things like assign everything a Halloween candy. I think this was actually a recommended idea that came up in the comments of last month on my Instagram. So thank you so much for the idea. This isn't organized in any way. Like I didn't put it from best to worst. I'm just gonna pick a book off of here and I'm gonna tell you the Halloween candy that I think of when I think of that book, either my experience with it or the book in general. Oh, I guess we're starting with Bride. I thought about this for about 0.2 seconds. So I'm gonna commit to this being candy corn because the people who go hard for candy corn ride or die for candy corn. Meanwhile, the rest of us are sitting here like, it just tastes like a crayon. Like, what are you talking about? But when it comes to candy corn, that's not even in the realm of candy that I typically like. So there's no reason that I should like candy corn. And that's how I feel about this. I shouldn't have liked this and then I didn't. So it just went exactly as everyone probably expected. It's a paranormal romance. I gave it 1 star. This is a story of Misery, who is a vampire, and the vampires and the werewolves and the humans all interact, hate each other, have political maneuverings in the world, and at this point, Misery has to marry one of the werewolves for reasons, and we just follow that love story, but also a very chaotic and unorganized fantasy world building system. And I was up for having a fun, silly time. I just did not like the writing. I didn't like how I was delivered the information. I didn't like a single character. I didn't like their romantic relationships. I didn't like any of the side plots going on. I didn't care for the constant referencing of things that I needed to like think about, like remember this for later, this character's gonna matter later. It felt like Misery was not the star of her own story. It was somebody else's storyline, who I wouldn't want to read about anyway. So this is my bad, but I thought, I don't know what I thought, but I thought wrong. Sometimes I like to pick up popular romance thinking that this could be the one for me. This could be the thing that like changes my whole perspective and like maybe I will find this new avenue of types of books to love. And this one just didn't do it, but that's okay. Next up, I put The God of the Woods. This was a 4.25 for me. I quite liked it. And the Halloween candy that I'm thinking of is, you know how they used to do like Reese's peanut butter cups and it was just a whole peanut butter cup, an individual one, and then they started doing minis and now it's like only minis. And a Reese's peanut butter cup is in my top 3 favorite chocolate bars, but the minis I think are unbalanced. So it's still made up of a bunch of things that I typically like, but the balance is just a little bit off. If it was done a little bit differently, it could have been my all-time favorite Halloween candy, which is the peanut butter pumpkin, because that ratio to peanut butter and chocolate is just like perfection. This book takes place at a summer camp. It's in the 70s and you're following this teenage girl who is going to the summer camp for the first time. Her parents own the summer camp and there are reasons that she hasn't gone before. And one of those is that her brother went missing like a decade ago and he was never found. And then she also goes missing. And we are following them and parents and random people who work at the summer camp who know the campers throughout time. There's a couple different timelines and it's a literary mystery, so it's very focused on the interpersonal stuff, the drama, very slow scenes and just building of this mystery. It's not like plot twists and turns and wild things happening. It's not a thriller in any capacity. It is a pure mystery. There are 2 things you're wondering. What happened to these missing children? And along the way you get insight into so many different relationships and I just found it really fascinating. There's a whole live show discussion for this for the Literally Did book club. I'm glad I picked it. I know it wasn't for everybody, but we don't do literary mysteries very often. I'm glad we did. Model Home is something that I would recommend to almost anybody who likes their horror with a mix of like real life conversations and touching on a bunch of issues, which is something I do typically like from my horror. just when you put it all together, this isn't something that I enjoyed reading. And if you go into this thinking it's a haunted house story, which is what some of it might imply, I think you have to change your expectations, which is how I feel about a cookies and cream chocolate bar. Because when you think like white chocolate, you think it's gonna have the flavor of chocolate still, but it's white. It's not. It's just like sugar and oil or whatever. And I have never had white chocolate and not been disappointed. So cookies and cream is something that I think I could recommend pretty broadly. I think people like it, but it's not for me. It actually makes me feel a little sick. It makes sense as a flavor. I'm glad it exists, but I struggle with it. What I would describe this as is a fantastic book that just wasn't for me. It touches on so many things like racism and gender and class systems. It's about abuse and it's about trauma and it's about mental health. We're following these siblings. Maybe if you followed all of them equally or got to know all of them equally, I could have enjoyed it more. But they grew up in this family where their parents were unwilling to leave their family home. They created this very intentional life for their children. And even though there were bad things happening, they were committed to this house and this life. And as adults, the siblings have lost their parents and they're trying to figure out what happened to them, if the ghosts of the house got to them, if something in real life took their lives. And it's just navigating like early adulthood for all of them, some of them being parents, some of them dealing with mental health crises, and just grieving their parents. It has such thoughtful and meaningful dialogue that I don't think anybody will dislike that portion of. I just don't know if the storytelling of it is gonna be for everyone. It wasn't for me and I gave it a 2. And I love River Solomon, like so much. For The Road by Cormac McCarthy, I'm going to assign it an arrow bar because I don't like pure chocolate bars, but I can't deny that it's like a good version of chocolate, like it's a good quality chocolate. My mom, growing up, that was her favorite chocolate bar, and I never understood it because it's just chocolate. I was like, how can that be your favorite? Why don't you want nuts? Why don't you want caramel? Like, why don't you want interesting things happening? And so in my mind, an arrow bar has always been really overhyped. And I'm always, when I eat it, expecting a different experience. Like the bubbles are really gonna do something for me this time, but it never does. But it's reliable and it's expected and it's something my mom would like. I gave this a 4. It is an apocalyptic story of a man and his son, and they are just traveling. They are walking, they are surviving, they're trying to find food, they're trying to find shelter. They're constantly having to stay on the move because they're just in danger. The way that the world is currently existing is not a safe place, and they know that their time is coming to an end based on what's going on around them. The language is the number one thing to appreciate about this. It's beautifully descriptive, it's gruesome, and it's just about these two people who are each other's everything. It's all that they really have ever known, and it's all they care about, and they will do anything for the other's survival. Now, Mistborn to me is a Snickers bar because it's layered, because there's a lot of things happening and there's always something to be enjoying. And when it originally came out, I'm sure it like changed the game in fantasy and in chocolate making, because like, how can you pack that much in a book and in a chocolate bar? So like, there's a magic system, a very detailed magic system, which was so much more accessible than I thought. It has to do with metals, and metals like in your body, and consumption, and using these metals to do things. It felt a little superhero-y, people flying around, getting in control of your magic. We have this one character named Vin who is a part of this group that is very cast out from society. They're at the bottom of the food chain. They are being abused, they are enslaved, and we have this man whose name I did not just forget, Kelsier, and he is taking Vin under his wing and explaining to her that she is a mistborn and what that means, and this like ability that she's had to influence people her entire life means more. And so there's the magic learning, and then there's also a lot of political maneuvering because Kelsier has this goal and he needs to basically take down the entire government system. And then also Vin is being used within that as a pawn, and so she has to pretend she's nobility to get in with them. and she goes to all of these balls and she's like dancing with these boys. And so there's a lot of things to enjoy and nothing takes up too much. Like, it's just so well paced and so well thought out, and I'm sure that's the thing for this entire like series and beyond. There's violence and death, but there's also romance and found family and just connection. It was really interesting. It's not one of the best things I've ever eaten or read, but I can see why it's a pretty top tier fantasy and chocolate bar for most people. Eliza Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. I don't really have anything, I said this in the video, I don't really have anything to say beyond just this is an action-packed book and it felt like watching a movie where I was just there and experiencing it, and I don't have a lot of thoughts after the fact. Still giving it a 4. It's following the gentleman bastards who are thieving, and there's some fantasy stuff. It's the chocolate, the candy, I'm gonna call this like a Twix because it has elements that I like, and then there's like a biscuity crunch that I'm like, I could do without it, but also if it didn't have that, it wouldn't be a Twix. So I still appreciate it for what it is. Like, this wasn't my favorite reading experience, but I can't deny that it's a 4 still. Anyway, next up, we're gonna do That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf by Kimberly Lemming. This, much like the Coffee Crisp, also has a very descriptive, accurate title. It's not like a Wonder Bar or a Kit Kat where you're like, what does that even mean? Like, how does that even describe the chocolate? I don't even know what the flavors to expect are. A Coffee Crisp is coffee and it's crispy. This is about a girl who throws a love potion at a werewolf. You know exactly what's gonna kick it off, and then he falls in love with her. Also, these two things are definitely for adults. This is the second book in a series where these girls are falling in love with demons, and the demons can appear in any different way. And especially in this one, he, during certain acts, can like transform into various things, keeping things interesting. It's a 3.75. It's a silly, goofy time. I liked the adventure that we were on, the mystery that was being solved, and then also just the relationship between these characters was enough for me to keep reading, but it's not something that I'm just like in love with. I like the author's writing, everything's pretty decent. Another paranormal romance, what was up with me this month? That I did not like the writing. I did not like the characters. I did not like the storyline. I did not like the plot. Is Darkfever by Karen Marie Moning. This is from 2006. It's very much set in 2006, and I don't think that that setting really adds anything to the book. So it's not one that I think holds up, but if you read it in its time and loved it, totally get it. I'm gonna call this like getting a box of raisins when you're trick-or-treating. I gave it a 1.75. Like, it's different and it's unexpected, but it also just feels like it's had all of the actual life sucked out of it. And there are people who are absolutely gonna love getting a box of raisins while trick-or-treating. So more power to you. This is about a girl who loses her sister and she goes somewhere else and has to figure out what happened to her, and what happened to her is she got involved with dangerous fairy stuff, and she is some special type of fairy seer. I found it dull, I found it annoying, I found it had some tough writing to get into, and honestly just really glad that I have gotten into fairy stuff, because for, you know, the last 10 years I've been like, I don't want to read fairies, I don't like fairies, fairies aren't for me. It's the same with dragons. Like, this is stuff that my mom grew up reading, and when I was picking stuff off of her bookshelves growing up, like, I was never into the fantastical creature things. And last year I picked up fairy stuff for kind of the first time and got really into some of them, and if I had read this before those, I would have been more convinced that fairies aren't for me. So I'm happy to know myself well enough when reading this to not have it turn me off from an entire species. Then we've got The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, which is my favorite read of the month, my only 5-star. Thank goodness for the series that I'm doing where I'm finding 5 stars from every year I've been alive. Otherwise, I wouldn't have ended up with a win perhaps this month. I don't know. I want to call this an O. Henry because, again, there's a lot going on in it, but it's kind of understated. It's just like roasted nuts, some really simple like caramel or toffee or nougat or whatever is in it. And it's been around for so long, you can't deny it's good. It's a combo that's been done before. It's not bringing anything necessarily new to the table. It feels classic. It feels intentional. So This is about a woman who just finds out at the beginning of the book that she might have had a twin. And that's not super important to the story, but it is when you factor in that she has been reached out to by this famous author who's done all of these interviews throughout the years. Like, she's not this reclusive, no one talked to her kind of author. She does interviews, but she's constantly lying about her life. She's making things sound more interesting or sound less interesting, and she finally wants to tell the truth. And so she meets up with this woman, our main character, and she's going to tell her the story of her childhood, which revolves around these twin girls. And it's about the life of these twins and the people that come into their life and how they're treated and how they connect or don't connect with each other. And it's just their experience together and what happens in this home. It's very gothic, it's historical, it's slow and descriptive, which I loved. I think a lot of people might find it overly descriptive, the way maybe you think an O. Henry has too many things going on. And then you pop out of that story and you get our character and how she's like navigating the conversations with this author, what she wants to get out of these discussions and what she's learning about her own life. This isn't a favorite book of all time, not of the year, but I can't deny it's a 5. Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones is like when you get a bag of chips in your trick-or-treat bag. It's like classic Lay's and you're like, it's not the most exciting thing because look at all this chocolate, look at all this candy, look at all this sugar, but then you really appreciate it because it breaks up the moments of the salty goodness as you're consuming all of this candy. It's not necessarily special, but it's a nice surprise, a nice reprieve, and also feels very classic. When you get into a Stephen Graham Jones, you can always know what to expect by the style of it. He has a very unique authorial voice. You will never pick up a book of his and not know that it's written by him. He's just doing something a little bit different and it feels classic. For me, it feels like coming back to something I've had before, I've read before. I gave this a 4. It's a werewolf story about a young boy and him understanding that his family is werewolves and what that means for him and what his life will look like and how he can prepare himself best for having these urges and this hunger. It's a slower book. It's very descriptive. It's just like very thought out, and the explanation of how werewolves function is the point of it. There's a lot of real life metaphors. I think there's a lot that Stephen Graham Jones is saying about his own life and his perspective on the world through the lens of werewolves. Speaking about werewolves, 2 books I don't have here because I don't have physical copies of them. One is The Lover, I think that was what it was called, by Sylvia Marina Garcia, and one is Big Bad by Chandler Baker. These are both really short, like under 100-page werewolf stories, and I would say the candy they're like fuzzy peaches, because a lot of chocolate bars, they're just like a little piece of the chocolate bar and nothing has changed. Or like if they're Smarties or they're Skittles, they're just Smarties or Skittles, but in a smaller box. Same with Sour Patch Kids, same size Sour Patch Kids as when you get a big bag, but they're just in a smaller bag. For some reason, Fuzzy Peaches, they don't just give you like 1 or 2 Fuzzy Peaches. I wish they did it more like the Jolly Ranchers, where they just like give you 1 or 2 in a pack. They don't change the size, but the Fuzzy Peaches are like tiny little Fuzzy Peaches, and it never feels satisfying enough to eat them one by one. It's like you have to eat them all at the same time to get the same amount you would get from a Fuzzy Peach. And then it's just like over a little too quickly and doesn't give you the satisfaction that you want, but I still gave both of these a 4. They're just a little too short and I want them, I think they could have been grander stories. They both revolve around housing and werewolves. So The Lover, there is this sister duo and there's a man who comes to stay in their like house rental, and then he sticks around. He seems like a really good guy and he marries one of the sisters. Yet the other one starts to have her own romantic entanglement with him. Writing was great, atmosphere was great. And then Big Bad, there's a husband and wife and a man comes to stay on their property, and they also have 2 daughters. And so of all of these 5 people, someone's a werewolf. And I guess that's what you're wondering, is like who's doing what and who's controlling who and how they're trying to protect other people, and whose safety is at risk. And there are these wolves also like around nearby howling, and I had a good time with it. It was a 4. The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater, I have the best one for, and it's Skittles, because you know when you open the tiny little bag of Skittles, there's only like 6 in there and it's never a perfect mix. And like if you like every Skittles flavor, you're so disappointed because every time you open it, it's like sometimes there are literally 4 purples and 2 reds, and you're like, but I wanted an orange, but I wanted, what other colors there? Yellow. So The Raven King is a 4-star for me. It's the last book in the Raven Cycle series, and it's basically like all of these characters just randomly put into a packet of Skittles, and you don't know who you're gonna get, and you don't know if you're fully satisfied with who the book focused on and how everything wrapped up with all of these characters. The first half of this, I did a whole vlog of spoilers because my memory of this is that it was a real disappointment for the series to end how it did. And then when I was reading it in the vlog, I was like, the first half of this is still so good. Like, it's so good, it's so strong, it's everything I remember. It's got all of these quiet, intimate moments between all of these people. And then the second half just kind of fell off. It needs to wrap up 2 major storylines. One of the main characters is supposed to die by the end of the series, and they also have been searching for this Welsh king for 4 books. And the way both of those situations ended was not satisfying. It happened very quickly, and then suddenly we were in an epilogue, and the epilogue wasn't fully satisfying. I think that this was a great setup for what Maggie Stiefvater wanted to do in the Dreamer trilogy and taking a character in here and expanding on like the universe, but it just left some of us in the dust with what we wanted to feel at the end of this like epic series. Lobizona, another werewolf story that was a 3 for me. This is a YA tale of a girl who is undocumented living in the States, and her family hasn't told her that she's a werewolf, but she spent her entire life being hidden and protected from the people who might find out she's a werewolf, and also the people who might find out that she isn't supposed to be living in the States and is what they consider to be an illegal person. Highlighted so many great things, had so many fantastic conversations around that undocumented status and the way that people are treated. And I'm gonna go ahead and call this one Nerds because I think it's very much for a younger audience. Are there any adults out there who like nerds are your favorite candy? I mean, sound off in the comments below. I think it's just a bunch of tiny pieces, a bunch of tiny scenes all added together. It has crunch, it has bite. There's definitely substance, but it's also just pretty simple and consistent. This girl comes to learn about her life and makes a space for herself, and it's a beautiful thing to watch, but it wasn't a super intriguing premise for me at the end of the day, so that's why it was a 3. Okay, then I've got all of my little novellas, and I'm getting tired of the metaphors for Halloween candy. I don't think I have that many left. I went on a journey with horror novellas this month, and it is continuing into November. Hopefully I find some big wins. These ones were all 2 and 3 stars, so I'm just gonna call them all Whoppers. They're not my favorite. Again, like the biscuit situation is not my favorite, but I understand why people like it. I'm not gonna sit there and eat like a whole bag of Whoppers. Like, you don't want 30 Whoppers. You just get a little bit of it, like a little novella, just 1 or 2 at a time, and you're good. Actually, maybe To Be Devoured by Sarah Tatlinger should be like Sour Patch Kids, because maybe you get like really caught off guard by the intensity of the sourness at first. This is definitely the most graphic. The things that this main character wants to devour. It's pretty gross, so check that out if you want some graphic consumption. Weep Woman Weep by Maria de Blasi. This is about La Llorona and these girls who are just really, really close, and one of them ends up dying, but her spirit is still around, and it's like breaking this generational cycle. The Bell Chime by Mona Kabani is a story of this girl who like sees a poster of herself one day, and it's a picture she's never seen, so she has a stalker, and it's like there's just a looming threat. It's a lot about dreams and nightmares. And then Dirty Heads by Erin Dries. Why do I barely remember this one? I know it's a coming of age story. It took a long time for the action to really pick up. Maybe this is more like a Tootsie Roll. You know when you're chewing a Tootsie Roll for so long and you're like, why did I pick this up? Like, why is this something? But then by the end, like, it starts to like become malleable, and then it's a really great experience, but then it's over. I just remember this boy's really struggling in life. It's queer, and then he finally confronts the big bad situation. Now, these two I actually have ones that I thought of beforehand. Your Shadow Half Remains by Sunny Moraine is like those wax bottles full of like sugar water or whatever it is. And the first time you try one, you're like, oh, fun. It's like a candy pop bottle. You put it in your mouth and like, you're like, what? This part isn't edible? Like, this is not what I expected. So if you go into this thinking it's an apocalyptic story and you're going to learn about the apocalypse, you're going to be left chewing on wax at the end, because it's actually about what's inside and the relationship between a couple characters who are living in this apocalyptic scenario that we don't really get that much insight into, except you're not supposed to look at other people because you might die, you might become extremely violent. And it's the little pocket of safety that they create for themselves and each other to stay sane and survive. I gave this a 4. I thought it was really interesting and lovely. And then Pocketknife Kitty by Shannon Riley is a butterfinger, because it's got like kind of a suggestive title, and also it gets stuck in your teeth. Butterfinger is one of my favorites, but I always regret eating it because it's just like, it's so sticky and crumbly at the same time that it just creates something that you're left with for a while. You're thinking about it hours after you've consumed it. This was a 4.25, so it stuck in my teeth in a good way. I really could not get this out of my head for days after reading it. It is sexual horror, an erotic horror. No, it's sexual body rot horror. I think that really lays out what's going to happen in here for you. We have a woman living in a small town and she decides to have a sexual adventure with a stranger. And then it's really disgusting. She gets herself in a sticky situation, much like a lot of Halloween candy can do. That's my October wrap up. Thank you so much for watching and allowing me to make this a silly fun time by getting a theme going. I will see you in a couple days, probably with a vlog. And otherwise, I hope you had a great October. I would love to hear what you read, if you loved anything, so I can kind of live vicariously through you. I know, like, I had some good things, and actually this is good for me to run through them all and actually confront myself with how many were good. Just like there weren't all-time favorites in here, but next month I think is going to be a banger. If you want any early information about it, my members just got a lot of information for the upcoming month. It's going to be a fun time. I hope to see you over there. Bye!